Should bring out my clapper. Hey everyone, how's it going? I'm Austin, and thank you for being so brave. I mean, you have to be brave if you're gonna go on an exploration into the most controversial, transcendent book of all time. It's leveled nations, split time in half. I mean, we're just trying to make sense of it all. And in order to do that, we've been going through the book of Jonah. And currently we're in chapter 2 of the book this week. And, last week we left off on kind of a cliffhanger. Jonah is sinking to the bottom of the ocean floor. He's crying out in a plea of distress to the Lord, only to have the Lord answer him by having him be swallowed by a giant fish. We see that it is not easy to get away from the presence of the Lord. And the author of Jonah paints the character as someone we should see ourselves in. I mean, haven't you ever been in this situation before? The one Jonah is in right now, where all you want to do is run and hide? Have you ever been in the situation before where all you want to do is run and hide from God? I know I have. Sometimes the presence of the Lord is not only scary, but it's costly. Sometimes it lands you knee-deep in whale blubber, literally and metaphorically. And it's because we relate to Jonah so much that typically I think we're tempted to ask a dangerous question here. And I think we ask this question too because it's within our nature to be pragmatic. The question is this: whose fault is this? Was it Jonah's fault that he ended up in the whale because of his disobedience? Or was it God's fault that he ended up in the whale? After all, God is sovereign. Sometimes, depending on your faith background, we even go so far as to say, was it Satan's fault? Maybe pulling the strings from behind the curtain like a puppet master? Well, if it's Jonah's fault, then certainly every time I find myself in the, belly of the whale, then maybe the pressure of doing good is just too much. I wouldn't be able to keep up. I know if I were in Jonah's shoes, having been asked to go to the people that I most feared and condemn them, I probably would have done the same thing. And in fact, if we're going with the whole metaphorical thing here, I know I've been asked to do the really hard thing and simply put my hand up and just said, God, nope, I am not going to do that. And if it's God's fault, then we fall into another pit. If it's God's fault, it might cover the question of sovereignty, sure, but that certainly leaves a blind spot open for if my shortcomings have any real consequences in the world. For example, I know if I murder someone, I'm going to jail. Is that punishment divine or not? I don't know. From my theological disposition, I certainly lean harder on this being God's responsibility, but I also see how that can be pretty dicey. It certainly doesn't always translate into the real world very well, anyway. And if we blame Satan, we disregard not only the whole text, but the whole text around the book, the whole Bible. And more than that, the concept of the Satan has become so westernized, I'm not even sure I know what I mean when I say it anymore. So what if we didn't ask that question? Not because we don't know the answer, which I certainly don't, but what if we asked the question that the author of Jonah wants us to ask? Namely, will God forgive Jonah? At that point, the question of whoever's fault this was is null and void because it happened. It happened in the story. Like, where we are is where we are, and now there's only going forward because time moves linearly, and we can't stop to ponder this because the question that needs to be answered, and the question that needs to be answered is, will God forgive Jonah? I mean, Jonah has been nothing but a schmuck the whole time. He was asked to do one thing, which he didn't. If I was God, I would have just smote Jonah right there. Smote Jonah. I would have just smote Jonah right there on the spot. Boom, renamed him. But not only does Jonah run away, he runs as far as he possibly can in the opposite direction. And then when the pagans are comfortable to quickly plead with the divine, Jonah is quickly comfortable to die in an attempt to run even further from God. Honestly, I think this is where I feel most connected with Jonah, though. Maybe you don't, and that's fine. Maybe you feel more connected to him when he's angry or when he's terrified, but in this passage right here is where I feel most connected to him. where he's in the belly of the fish and he's full of doubt and shame, and all he wants to do is run and hide. And that's why this is such an important question to answer, and answer well, because if God can forgive Jonah for being such a schmucking schmuck, then he can forgive me too for being the screw-up that I am. So Jonah's in the belly of a big fish, the fish that ate him because God ordained it, and he says this, "You cast me into the deep, into the heart of the seas. And the flood surrounded me. All your waves and your billows, they passed over me. And I said, I'm driven from your sight. Yet I shall again look upon your holy temple. But the waters, they closed in over me to take my life. The deep surrounded me. Weeds were wrapped about my head at the roots of the mountains. I went down to the land whose bars closed upon me forever. Yet you brought my life up from the pit. Oh Lord, my God, when I was fainting away, I remembered the Lord, and my prayer came to you into your holy temple. Those who pay regard to vain idols, they forsake their hope of steadfast love. But I with a voice of thanksgiving will sacrifice to you what I have vowed. I will pay, because salvation belongs to the Lord." Now, when I started this channel, I made a pact to myself that I would not read us into the book, that we would approach the text as though we had never read it before, and see what we can make sense of in all of this. But many of us know what it's like to be the schmuck, to be the screw-up in a room. Many of us, if not now, at some point have screwed up royally and felt like we were trapped in the bottom of a deep, dark well. If you're there now and haven't been reminded of this yet, then it would be an honor to be the first, to let you know that God is in the well with you, just as he was in the belly of the big fish with Jonah. Did you catch it? No, the Lord didn't manifest himself in there in a burning bush, but because this is poetry, we do have to read it differently. So let's look again. Remember, this is the prayer of Jonah, as we talked about in the last episode. He says this, "My prayer came to you in your holy temple." The only way for the prayer to come to the Lord in the temple is if Jonah recognizes that all of creation acts as the temple of God. And Jonah recognizes that the presence of the Lord is there in the temple and with him also. Jonah recognizes that this is a metaphorical temple of the Lord, because just a few lines earlier he says he shall look again on the temple, on the real temple, back in Jerusalem where he just left. But for now, he seems to have found the presence of God dwelling in the belly of a big fish with him. And that is salvation for Jonah, to be with God, to meet him personally. And if you can see that God is with you in the big fish, then as Jonah did, remember what he's done for you. He brought your life up from the pit before. You didn't get yourself out then, you won't get yourself out now. You couldn't save yourself from the spiral of sin and shame then, and you can't do it now. Because this life, it's not about you. This life is about the one who took on your sin and shame, and it killed him. If this life was about you, then it wouldn't end well, because philosophically speaking, and as the apostles say, you killed God. We all did. And Jonah doesn't go on to say that he's going to sacrifice with a voice of thanksgiving and pay what he's vowed so that he can earn any favor from the Lord or gain his way to salvation or reconcile himself to anyone or anything. He says he will sacrifice his life with thanksgiving and pay what he vows because the steadfast love of the Lord has met him and pulled him from the pit of despair and saved him. He says he will do those things because the Lord has reminded him of how great and powerful the love of the Lord is. That even though Jonah is a royal failure, that God can forgive him. He says he'll do those things because the Lord is worthy of it. It's important to realize that he hadn't yet been spit up on the land. He's saying this in the belly of the fish. How can he say that salvation belongs to the Lord when he's not saved yet? He's either one of two things, insane, or he recognizes that salvation doesn't always look like we expect it to. And in this case, the salvation is being eaten by a giant fish because, remember, the alternative was death. The author has to be posing that when we find ourselves in the midst of screwing up like Jonah and in a deep, dark place, we can find God. And we can find hope, and we can find reconciliation, and we can find the kingdom of heaven because it finds us. Thanks so much. This was Bible Unbound.